So welcome to Ratio Christi. For those of you who came and heard about it but don't know fully what it is, it's an official club here at UNCW, and we do apologetics, Christian apologetics. So apologetics just means giving a defense or giving evidence for why you believe what you believe. And since it's Christian apologetics, we're giving evidence for why we believe that Christianity is true. So that doesn't mean you have to be a Christian to attend. You can have any faith, no faith at all, although we hold that atheists have faith as well. So, but you can be any background and attend here. We discuss all points of view. We look at all the evidence. And even if at the end, when 8:30 rolls around, if you don't agree with me and I don't agree with you, we can still be friendly, shake hands, and see you next week. So that's kind of what Ratio Christi is about. Before I get started, I do want to again thank Myrtle Grove Presbyterian Church. They come once a month and provide drinks and snacks. They're back at the table back there. So if in the course of the talk, if you get thirsty or hungry, you're allowed one time to get out of your seat and to subtly make your way back to the back. But we really do appreciate them. We're honored to have their pastor Stacy Miller with us today, so we're thankful for him to be here, and thank you for your church and your partnership with us in this. One other thing before we get started. Last weekend we were at the Simpsons and we talked about scientific naturalism, and it came to our attention as a staff that maybe some of the ways that we communicated that worldview was done in less than an amicable manner. Maybe it wasn't intentional, I know that for sure, but it may have been communicated in a way that demeaned or belittled the scientific naturalistic worldview. In other words, that who would believe that? You know, it doesn't make sense, it's illogical. While we do believe that the Christian worldview is the correct worldview, is the proper worldview, has the most evidence that supports it, we definitely don't want to demean anybody's worldview. We know that not everybody in here holds the same worldview that we do as Christians. There are probably some of you here that may hold a scientific naturalistic worldview. And so we didn't mean, if you were there, we didn't mean for that to come across in any way demeaning or belittling of you or the worldview that you hold. So just want to mention that just in case anybody was offended. We kind of pride ourselves on being the opposite of that, of being able to discuss many different worldviews and to do it fairly even-handedly. So I'll just put that out there for what it's worth. So, all right. We have been discussing this semester worldviews. And worldviews, everyone has one, right? It's the lens through which you view the world. And some of you are conscious of your worldview. Some of you have never really thought that, hey, I have a particular worldview. Some of us have consistent worldviews. Some of us, our worldviews aren't very consistent. I think tonight, and if anybody holds this worldview, I'm not saying this in a belittling way, I think this is an inconsistent worldview. And we'll discuss that a little bit later on. But so we started with Christian theism, and then we went to deism, and then scientific naturalism, and now kind of on the culturally, we will have hit kind of rock bottom with nihilism. And so to get started, you may be wondering what in the world that is. Hopefully by the end of the night, you're not wondering what in the world it is, because it's my job to explain what it is. But I'm going to show you we're going to watch a play, okay? Now, it's a 35-second play, okay? But I want you, at the end of this, we're going to watch this play, and then I want you to break up into groups of 3 or 4 and discuss the meaning of this play, okay? It's by Samuel Beckett. If you're familiar with that name, I wasn't before I started studying this. But he's known for this play, and it's called Breath. So no talking because it's only 35 seconds, so you'll miss the whole point of it. So let's go ahead and watch it, and then we'll discuss. Let's see. Are we on? All right. So, if you could, break up into groups of 3 or 4 or whoever's in your immediate vicinity. And I'm going to cut you off after like 5 minutes because I know you can go on and on about this. So, I know you could wax on for hours on this. Anybody want to offer maybe the highlights of your group discussion as far as what the meaning of the play Breath? Anybody want to share? Sam.
The visual and the auditory thing of like as the light faded, like the breath, you know, it was like seemed like a last breath, you know, the light dying. It's like, hey, that's kind of neat, I thought.
It sure sounded like that, didn't it? Yeah. Anyone else?
We said the point was it was pointless. It had a lot of non-practical.
Okay.
And then it was over.
Okay. Anyone else find any hidden meanings within the play? No? That about covered it?
How much money did he spend on the stage set?
I think he just took his trash for like a week and just collected it and dumped it out there. But so somebody had a hand up. Chris, were you going to comment on the play?
Real quick, I think it's just as quick as that breath was creepy and weird. That all we see is just a bunch of randomness. I think that's supposed to be like a representation of life, I guess, where it seems all just random, and then like that breath, that's how much we're here for, and then poof, gone.
Okay, yeah. If it had a point, and I'm sure the author intended for it to have some point, but if it had a point, I think that you're probably onto it. I think all of y'all are onto it as far as life. Life is pointless. It's just stuff. I think the cry, I read some people actually, some professor from England actually tried to analyze it. And she said that the cry at the beginning was supposed to signify some sort of an infant cry. And then you've got this deep breath, and then you have this exhalation at the end, and then the lights go dim. So yeah, I think it's supposed to be some picture of life, but life being pointless, meaningless, up to anybody's interpretation. And this play is one that is pointed to as being representative of the nihilistic worldview or nihilistic viewpoint. So what is nihilism? Before we get started, the big question that we need to address before we can even move forward is this. Harrison, what's the issue?
That's the Nile River.
Okay.
Nihilism versus nihilism.
Yeah. How do you pronounce it?
How do you pronounce annihilate?
How do you pronounce it? Because I've been pronouncing it one way. I run into other people and they're pronouncing it another way. All the videos I'm watching, it's one way or the other way. What is it? Grant?
None of it matters.
Okay.
How do you pronounce annihilate?
Okay. How do you pronounce annihilate? True, but when we talk about God creating, how do we pronounce that? Mr. Smart Prime Minister? So anyway, just to let you know, I believe it can be pronounced either way. So whether you're comfortable with nihilism or nihilism, it's up to you, I guess. So it comes from the Latin word for nothing. And the definition is the philosophical belief that life and the universe have no meaning. Here's a quote from Sire, who's the author of the book that we're using throughout this worldview survey for the semester. And he says, nihilism is more a feeling than a philosophy. Strictly speaking, nihilism is a denial of any philosophy or worldview, a denial of the possibility of knowledge, a denial that anything is valuable. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, who would choose to have a worldview like this? And I think we'll find out by the end of the night that not a lot of people choose it, and a lot of people who should have it don't have it. So let's talk a little bit about how it's typically defined. So moral nihilism, you might see this term, basically it's denying that we can know anything objectively is right or wrong, is true or false. Then epistemological nihilism. Epistemological is just a fancy word for how we know what we know. Okay, so they would say we can't know anything. We can't know truths. There are no such thing as absolute truths. The only way that we can know things that we call truths are either within groups, like our culture, we define something, or you define something personally yourself. But there is no objective definition or meaning for anything, right? And then cosmic nihilism has to do more with nature, that there is no pattern for nature, there is no order in nature, everything is chaotic, everything is basically unintelligible. So you might, if you hear somebody talking about nihilism, you might hear them refer to any one of these three things kind of as nihilism. But basically what they all do is they all point to what you've likely heard, if you've heard the term, is existential nihilism, which it just means nihilism denies the meaning of life. I apologize if you can't see the bottom of the screen, you guys in the back. If you're in the back, you can actually turn around. We've got it on the screen in the back there as well, but it's also low, so it may be difficult for you to see either way. So anyway, when we're talking about nihilism, we're really talking about this, even though as we talk about existential nihilism, we'll get into the moral aspect, the epistemological aspect, and the cosmic aspect. So, where did nihilism come from? Well, I guess as long as there's been pessimism and skepticism, there's been nihilism. They're the folks that they don't want to admit anything, they want to deny everything. But I think as a worldview, I think with the ancient Greeks, we've seen some of this. There's a quote here by this poet, 6th century poet. He says, "The best for man were not to have been born and not to have seen the sun. But if once born, the second best for him is to pass through the gates of death as speedily as may be." This is the guy you want to take with you on spring break, right? That is a skeptic view, a pessimistic view, a nihilistic view. Then there's another philosopher that said, his name is Gorgias, by the way. That's not the proper pronunciation, but that's Grant pointed out his name. So Gorgias the philosopher. Nothing exists. If anything did exist, it could not be known. If it was known, the knowledge of it would be incommunicable. So basically, again, just this refrain of we can't know anything, nothing matters. And then, surprisingly, you see some roots of nihilism in the Copernican revolution. Can anybody think off the top of their head connect the dots between Copernicus and nihilism? Sam.
Realizing that the Earth is not at the center of the solar system, and furthermore not at the center of the universe, makes mankind realize their insignificance.
Bingo. Right, he's right on it. So with the advent of the heliocentric model, so now the Earth is no longer the center of our solar system, right? The sun is the center of our solar system. There was some strong pushback by the church, not necessarily for scientific reasons, a lot of them for theological reasons, right? Because if you read the Bible, if you read the Old Testament, the creation story, it's all about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? And then man on day 6 is the crown jewel of God's creation. And so now, and then it talks about how Joshua makes the sun stand still. So there's this view that the earth is in the center, and then the sun is moving around the earth. And so now all of a sudden, you're proposing these models here where where the earth is now moving, and the sun is the center of the solar system. Then you get Giordano Bruno, who proposes that the sun is just one of many stars in the universe, that there are other planets, and that there even could be other life on these other planets. And so you can begin to see why the church is really taking an interest in these scientific breakthroughs. And then, like Sam said, it contradicted the Christian view of the earth having a superior place in the universe, and that man is the crown jewel of God's creation. And so the more science discovers, the more we realize, okay, our solar system is right here, or we're right here, the Earth is right here, and there are billions and billions and billions of stars, right? And I don't think it could be expressed any better than by the philosopher Calvin, right? He's looking up and he sees all the stars and says, "I'm significant," screamed the dust speck, right? Which kind of sounds a bit like Carl Sagan when he refers to the Earth as the pale blue dot. And so just this idea of how insignificant we are in the universe, you can see how that can lead to a pessimistic, a nihilistic worldview. And so I borrowed this slide from John's presentation last week. So we can see the transition from Christian theism. God is a personal God, is the creator of the universe. Then to deism, where God creates, but then he steps back and he's not involved in his creation. And then in the 19th and 20th century, God is further reduced to the point where he's not even needed to explain everything that goes on in the world. And so we've moved from God personally involved over everything to now there is no God, and now it's just natural processes. And so what I want us to do is I want us to see how you get from scientific naturalism to nihilism. It's not a very big hop from naturalism to nihilism, okay? Friedrich Nietzsche, I mention him only because a lot of times when you hear nihilism, you always hear his name mentioned. Although, from a lot of folks I read, he wasn't a nihilist. He wrote a lot about it only because he realized what was happening with the rise of science and with the adoption of scientific naturalism. He realized where this was going. Okay, and as a matter of fact, we get his famous quote, "God is dead," from the parable of the madman in his book, The Gay Science. And so this is a parable of a madman going down the street and he's saying, "I seek God, I seek God." And everybody's looking around at him, laughing at him. And then he says, "Where is God? We've killed him." And so he gives this, this little speech about how we've killed God. And then everybody is kind of looking at him like they don't understand what he's saying, just kind of dumbfounded. And he takes his lantern and he smashes it on the ground. And he says, "I'm too early. It's not time yet." And what he's doing is he's saying with naturalism, the next step, once you eliminate God and everything is just coming from chaos and is just evolving naturally, and there's no purpose, there's no meaning to anything, it's just kind of is, that eliminates any purpose and meaning in life. And people are going to begin to despair once they've embraced this scientific naturalistic worldview. Now, why does there need to be meaning in life? Arthur Schopenhauer, who is the philosopher who influenced Nietzsche, says that we seek meaning in life because of the inevitability of suffering and the awareness and inescapability of death. Which makes sense, right? I mean, there's suffering in the world, there's death in the world, so there has to be some meaning to it all. Life just can't be about somebody that is born and they have some sort of a disease that cripples them their entire life, and then they die. There must be something more than life. And so people are searching for meaning. They're searching for something more. And Nietzsche said that for people that realize that suffering is inevitable, that death is inescapable, that these moments of happiness that we seem to experience are fleeting. We have that moment, that hilltop moment or that moment of euphoria, and the next thing we know, we're down again. That there are two options for those people. Number one is to be a nihilist, to say it's all meaningless, right? But the other option, he says, is this true world theory, which says, you know what? It posits that there's another reality. That, okay, we're suffering in this world, there's death in this world, but there's another reality that is beyond this world. Okay? And that it degrades earthly existence. So if you think of like Hinduism, where somebody suffers their entire life, their hope is that in reincarnation that they will come back and they will have a better life in a superior reality. And so these are the two options for somebody who lives in a broken world like we live in, is either it's all pointless, like the poet, the best thing is not to be born, but if you're born, hurry up and race to the finish line and die, or to posit a superior reality. And then, now notice the word posit, because he's not saying it exists, he's saying you've got this in your mind and it keeps you going. It's almost like you've talked yourself into this, that there is something more to keep you going, so that when you do eventually die and you do become worm food, at least you had a cheery attitude as you were going, or a hopeful attitude as you were going through life. And we see examples of this throughout history. Plato's forms. Plato said that there was a realm of the forms where the things that we see in this world exist perfectly in that other realm. Kant had a similar with the noumena that was out there that we can't know. All we can know is the phenomena that we see around here. And then the Christian heaven, right? We're suffering in this world, but there's a world beyond that we're living for, that we're looking towards. And this is the escape. This is when Nietzsche says an escape remains. He's saying it's this true world theory that this keeps us all from going mad, is that there's hope for a true world. So, Nietzsche said that because faith in the true world theory was deteriorating, right? Christianity was being debunked and science was now lifted up as the truth. We don't need God anymore. Because faith in the true world theory was deteriorating, there was increasing skepticism of Christianity, and so more and more pessimism towards the meaning of life, the purpose of why we're all here. And Nietzsche actually, he wasn't a big fan of Christianity. He thought it was better not to believe in a true world, because he thought that the people who believed in it, that they weren't as productive here on earth, right? They're kind of lazy. They were just, I'm just biding my time until I can go be in that sweet by and by. And the non-believer was the one that was really working and working hard and trying to do the best, because for them there was no sweet by and by. It was just the dirt, right? Taking a dirt nap. And so here, Nietzsche said that Christianity, he really believed that Christianity produced weak people. They didn't work hard. They didn't really want to work hard in this life. And so that's what's behind his idea that God is dead. He wasn't really an atheist saying God is dead, I hate him. He was just saying society has basically killed God through jettisoning any kind of theism or deism and embracing this scientific naturalism. By the way, if y'all have any questions during this, any comments to make, feel free. What I want to do now is the bridge here. There is a relationship between nihilism and what John talked about last week with scientific naturalism. Okay? Because if we're making this natural progression from theism, deism, scientific naturalism, this is what is connecting naturalism to nihilism. The first thing is this idea of necessity and chance. According to scientific naturalism, we appear to be free, but we're not. We're basically determined beings. And so anything that we do that seems like it's free will is not free will. It just looks like it is, okay? Because we live in a closed system where God can't intervene. So basically, all that exists is the natural world in this closed system, in this box that we call reality. All that exists is this closed system, and that the only thing that something happens is because something happened before that. And the only reason that happened is because something happened before that. It's just these natural processes that are happening. And so the only reason that you're here is because something happened before that made you come here. And the only reason that happened is because there's something naturalistically that happened in your day that made that happen, that made it possible for you to come here. So you didn't freely come here. It was determined for you to be here, right? And so that's the scientific, naturalistic worldview. So can you see how the fact of not having free will and being determined, the next logical step could be nihilism? This idea, there's no meaning, there's no purpose in what I'm doing. I'm just kind of marching to the beat of my DNA. I'm just kind of being impacted or influenced by natural forces. Okay, and then chance. Chance is defined as either our ignorance of these deterministic forces, right? We don't know, I don't know what those things are that determine that I was going to be here tonight. So because of that, I chalk it up to chance. It's just chance, as if chance is a thing. Whereas really, chance is not an explanation. Chance is the absence of an explanation, right? We just say, well, it's just chance because we don't know the explanation. So chance is either our ignorance of what caused us to be here, or it's absolutely irrational. So these two things seem to be behind the scientific naturalistic worldview, that the reason why anything is that it is because it had to be that way, and by forces that we're not aware of how they all combined to do what they did, but they did it, and so that's why we're here, right? So it's not an explanation, but an absence of an explanation. So that's one bridge that Sire says is how we got from naturalism to nihilism. Okay? Next, can you trust your mind? John talked about this last week. If we are the product of blind forces, of matter, of the reaction of chemicals and all of the things that go on inside our body, and there's no intelligence behind it, it's just happened, it's evolved over time, can we trust our mind? If we are the result of impersonal forces, we have no way of knowing whether what we know is illusion or the truth. Can you see how that makes sense? If we're the result of a creator, then yes, then we can know that what we know is true. But if we are just the result of forces over time, over millions of years that eventually have resulted in me being me, how can I trust what I even think? Okay? One example that we've used here before, if you're driving down, and I think we probably used it up here on a Monday night. If you're driving down I-40 and you are approaching a formation of rocks on the bank, and it says Wilmington, 11 miles. Okay? Do you think that is the result of an intelligent designer, or do you think that is the result of the product of natural forces, erosion, random chance, processes that we don't know? Which one would you say that's the result of? Okay. We would probably say somebody's formed those rocks in that formation there to spell out Wilmington 11 miles. Is it possible that they randomly wound up in that formation? There's a possibility. It's not a very large possibility, but there is a possibility that wind and storms and hurricanes throwing rocks around, and over millions of years, that those rocks could have formed in that formation that's a Wilmington 11 miles. But the question is, if it did randomly form, can we even trust that we are 11 miles from Wilmington when we see that sign? What's that? I mean, if there's a small chance that could happen randomly, is it possible for us even to trust that information that was randomly, accidentally conveyed? No, because there was no intelligence behind it. There was no way to transmit that information. It was random, and yes, it's almost a miracle that it happened, so that the rock spelled out Wilmington 11 miles. The fact that it happened is possible, but the information, the message that it seems to be communicating is very, very unlikely because it happened randomly, right? It's like if there's if you have a monkey on a keyboard, and he's working at NASA, and he's just randomly just on a keyboard like that, let's say by chance he actually creates some sort of a program, okay? That's one thing, but can you trust his program, right? Because it's randomly done. And so that's the point behind this. Can you trust your mind? If our minds, if our brains are the product of millions of years of random processes over time, okay, that's one thing. That's how we got them. But secondly, can we even trust what they are thinking? And that's the bridge from scientific naturalism to now into nihilism. If we can't even trust what we're thinking, we can't even tell if reality is real, then the next step could be despair, could be nihilism, could be loss of purpose, loss of meaning in life. John mentioned this quote by Darwin as he's referring to his evolutionary theory. He says, "The horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust the conviction of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" So Darwin recognized it himself. I mean, if we can't trust the convictions, the thoughts, the thought process of a monkey, and we have evolved into that, from the monkey, then how could we even trust our own minds? So you can see now how it's not a big leap to get from scientific naturalism to this worldview of what can we know? Can we know anything? The third bridge from naturalism to nihilism is this is and ought. So in naturalism, there is no ought. There just is. So we're talking about moral judgments here, right? So there is no, you're doing this, you ought to do this, because there just is. The reason why I do anything I do is because I have been programmed basically over time to do what I'm doing. The chemicals are reacting in my body, the processes are working so that I really can't control what I do. I'm doing something, like I mentioned in the first bridge, is that we do something because something else happened before that, because something else happened before that. So it's a long process, which is then causing me to do the next thing. So if I go out and kill somebody, I can't be held liable for that because really I didn't have a choice in it. It's basically just my biology that caused me to act in a particular way. And that's the morality that we wind up getting out of a scientific naturalistic worldview, which if there's no right and wrong, again, you can see the next logical step is nihilism. Because again, we're in a closed system, so it's not like an open system is like an open box and God's able to reach in and kind of fiddle around. A closed system, the box is closed and it's just operating according to natural processes. So there are no true values, right? We don't have any kind of an objective standard imposed from outside of the box because there is nothing outside the box, right? We just have what's inside the box, which is just acting the way that we are humanly programmed to act. So with all that being said, this is what I think we should remember with nihilism, is if you believe that naturalism is true, then you should be a nihilist. I mean, I think that we've seen that if you believe that scientific naturalism is a valid worldview and is your worldview, the logical step to that should be some form of nihilism. And then I would argue that if you're not, that you have an inconsistent worldview, which isn't unusual. There are Christians that have an inconsistent Christian worldview. There are Christians who believe in some sort of karma or reincarnation. Like there's some sort of, if I do this, the bad karma is going to come back and get me and I'm going to get a flat tire or something like that. Our worldview is not consistent. We've adopted other aspects of other worldviews. So I would just submit that if you aren't a nihilist and yet you're a scientific naturalist, I would say that your worldview is inconsistent, and you need to try to reconcile that the same way that somebody who is a Christian and has inconsistent views on any Christian aspect, the afterlife or anything like that, would need to reconcile it and make sure that they line up with Scripture. Similarly, if you believe that your life has purpose, you can't be a nihilist nor hold to naturalism in good conscience. And if you can, I would love to hear that rationale. Darwin says nihilism is the natural child of naturalism. So it's the next logical step. Now in a little bit we're going to.
Darwin or Sire?
Oh, did I say Darwin?
Yeah.
Sorry, Sire. Sire said that nihilism is the natural child of naturalism. There is a way. We're gonna watch a little video as far as how nihilists try to kind of get around the idea of their nihilism in just a second. So these 8 important questions, with the 3 previous worldviews we've gone through these 8 questions that Sire asks. He didn't go through any of these with nihilism. Like he said, it's more of a feeling than a worldview. So in the book, everybody else that gets to present on all the other worldviews has this neatly, question number 1, what is prime reality? And Sire gives his answer. Question number 2, what is the nature of external reality? Sire gives his answer. There was none of this in the nihilism chapter, so I kind of had to scramble. What I wound up doing, and these are the 8 questions that every worldview, that Sire says every worldview needs to answer, and does answer, we would argue needs to answer consistently. So, and we're going to go through these. I've just got them listed here. So what is prime reality? What I've done is, because nihilism and scientific naturalism are so close to each other, I've taken John's definition from scientific naturalism, and then I put the nihilistic response down here as well, just so we can see how close they are. Okay? So Sire and John Zeno told us last week that prime reality is matter, which means the ultimate. There is no God who is ultimate, so prime reality, so matter is ultimate, okay? It's all that exists, it's always existed, there is no God. Nihilism says matter, agrees with the naturalists, maybe, right? Because we can't even know that, right? So there is some agreement here on what is prime reality. What is the nature of external reality? The cosmos exists, naturalism says the cosmos exists as a uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system. Again, the lid to the box is closed, so the world is just operating according to the natural processes that evolved. And that there is cause and effect. Nihilism would say, similarly, that the cosmos is closed, deterministic, chaotic, and meaningless. Okay? Basically the same thing as naturalism, just a little more pessimistic. All right? What is a human being? Naturalism says human beings are complex machines. Personality is an interrelation of chemical and physical properties we do not yet fully understand. Nihilism, this is a quote from Sire, human beings are conscious machines without the ability to affect their own destiny or do anything significant. Therefore, human beings as valuable beings are dead. Okay? Basically the same thing naturalism is saying, just a little more dramatic here. Okay? What happens to a person at death? I think we're looking at, again, the same thing. Death is the extinction of personality and individuality, cease to exist. Same thing. When you're done, and you decompose, and that's that. Okay? Why is it possible to know anything at all? Okay, so just our knowledge. How can we know anything at all? Naturalism says through our innate and autonomous human reasoning, including the methods of science, we can know the universe, the cosmos, including this world, is understood to be in its normal state. All right? Nihilism says we can't know anything, reason can't be trusted, truth is a meaningless illusion. Okay, not quite, but you can see how this is the just a natural conclusion from naturalism. How do we know what is right and wrong? Ethics is related only to human beings. We kind of create our own morality. And nihilism would say the same thing, basically. We can't know that right and wrong exist. What is the meaning of human history? Naturalism says history is a linear stream of events linked by cause and effect, but without an overarching purpose. Nihilism, history is meaningless, purposeless, endless series of cause and events. And then lastly, this is kind of the, okay, now what? How do I live? Right? How do I, based on this, how should I live out my beliefs? And naturalism says there is no particular commitment on any part of any given naturalist. Rather, core commitments are adopted unwittingly or chosen by individuals. And I didn't want to type all that, so I just said despair. Okay? All right? But really, it's just a pessimistic outlook on everything that's going on. Why do I do this? Why do I do that? Why, should I do anything? It's just a real, just again, meaningless and purposeless. Okay? So whoop, here's our video. Okay, so I mentioned that some nihilists attempt to get around the dark nature, the dark conclusions of nihilism by what they call optimistic nihilism. Okay, so if you're going to be a nihilist, that's probably the best kind to be, is an optimistic nihilist. But I want you to watch this video on optimistic nihilism, and then after it's done, I'm just gonna hear some of your responses, some things that jumped out at you, some things that seemed inconsistent, and we'll talk about that for a little bit, and then I'll just mention a few points about optimistic nihilism.
Human existence is scary and confusing. A few 100,000 years ago, we became conscious and found ourselves in a strange place. It was filled with other beings. We could eat some could eat us. There was liquid stuff we could drink, things we could use to make more things. The daytime sky had a tiny yellow ball that warmed our skin. The night sky was filled with beautiful lights. This place was obviously made for us. Something was watching over us. We were home. This made everything much less scary and confusing. But the older we got, the more we learned about the world and ourselves. We learned that the twinkling lights are not shining beautifully for us, they just are. We learned that we're not at the center of what we now call the universe, and that it is much, much older than we thought. We learned that we're made of many little dead things, which make up bigger things that are not dead for some reason, and that we're just another temporary stage in a history going back over 1 billion years. We learned in all that we live on a moist speck of dust moving around a medium-sized star in a quiet region of one arm of an average galaxy, which is part of a galaxy group that we will never leave. And this group is only one of thousands that together make up a galaxy supercluster. But even our supercluster is only one in thousands that make up what we call the Observable Universe. The universe might be 1 million times bigger, but we will never know. We could throw words around like 200 billion galaxies, or trillions of stars, or bazillions of planets, but all of these numbers mean nothing. Our brains can't comprehend these concepts. The universe is too big. There is too much of it. But size is not the most troubling concept we have to deal with. It's time, or more precisely, the time we have. If you're lucky enough to live to 100, you have 5,200 weeks at your disposal. If you're 25 now, then you have 3,900 weeks left. If you're going to die at 70, then there are 2,340 weeks left. A lot of time, but also not really. And then what? Your biological processes will break down, and the dynamic pattern that is you will stop being dynamic. It will dissolve until there is no you left. Some believe that there is a part of us we can't see or measure, but we have no way to find out. So this life might be it, and we might end up dead forever. This is less scary than it sounds, though. If you don't remember the 13.75 billion years that went by before you existed, then the trillions and trillions and trillions of years that come after will pass in no time once you're gone. Close your eyes. Count to 1. That's how long forever feels. And as far as we know, in the end, the universe itself will die and nothing will ever change again. Our videos induce existential dread in many people, and the last few minutes probably haven't helped. So for once we want to offer a different way of looking at these things. An unscientific, subjective point of view. The philosophy of Kurzgesagt, if you want. Please take it with a grain of salt. We don't know any more about human existence than you do. We counter existential dread with optimistic nihilism. What do we mean by that? Well, to summarize, it seems very unlikely that 200 trillion stars have been made for us. In a way, it feels like the cruelest joke in existence has been played on us. We became self-aware, only to realize this story is not about us. While it is great to know about electrons and the powerhouse of the cell, science doesn't do a lot to make this less depressing. Okay, but so what? You only get one shot at life, which is scary, but it also sets you free. If the universe ends in heat death, every humiliation you suffer in your life will be forgotten. Every mistake you made will not matter in the end. Every bad thing you did will be voided. If our life is all we get to experience, then it's the only thing that matters. If the universe has no principles, the only principles relevant are the ones we decide on. If the universe has no purpose, then we get to dictate what its purpose is. Humans will most certainly cease to exist at some point. But before we do, we get to explore ourselves and the world around us. We get to experience feelings. We get to experience food, books, sunrises, and being with each other. The fact that we're even able to think about these things is already kind of incredible. It's easy to think of ourselves as separated from everything, but this is not true. We are as much the universe as a neutron star, or a black hole, or a nebula. Even better actually, we are its thinking and feeling part. The sensory organs of the universe. We are truly free in a universe-sized playground. So we might as well aim to be happy and to build some kind of utopia in the stars. It's not as if we found out everything there is to know. We don't know why the rules of the universe are as they are, how life came into existence, what life is. We have no idea what consciousness is, or if we are alone in the universe. But we can try to find some answers. There are billions of stars to visit, diseases to cure, people to help, happy feelings to be experienced, and video games to finish. There is so much to do. So wrapping up, you've probably used up a good chunk of the time available to you. If this is our one shot at life, there is no reason not to have fun and live as happily as possible. Bonus points if you make the life of other people better. More bonus points if you help build a galactic human empire. Do the things that make you feel good. You get to decide whatever this means for you.
Okay, so thoughts on optimistic nihilism.
I'd like to know what those bonus points go to.
Yeah, bonus points if you make others' lives better, or if you build an intergalactic empire, you get a lot of bonus points, right? Okay.
I love that they recognize that it's not about us, but they're missing the key component of that it's about God.
Okay, yeah, it's not about us, it's a lot bigger than us, right? Yeah, other thing, Lexi.
I think it's really interesting how he mentions, like, you know, any bad that you do ultimately, like, doesn't matter. There is no sort of cosmic justice or return or anything. So he tells us to be really nice to people, but like, why? If that doesn't make me happy, can I be mean to people if that makes me happy? Because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, is that really justice if you know, Hitler, rather than, you know, or the Nazis, rather than being tried, just eventually retired, died, decomposed into the ground, and people forgot about what they did, right? Who else I saw? Yes, Lily.
I thought it was interesting how they said something about, like, there's no purpose, so you get to create your own purpose, but at the same time, like, isn't that just contradictory, like, in itself? Like, if it's only there's a purpose, then, like, why can you create a purpose? I don't know if that makes sense. That was just
yeah, so they said that it's very subjective, right?
Yeah.
So if we're all eventually going to wind up as worm food and all the planets are eventually going to grow cold and die, then just make your life what you want it to be, right? What's an obvious problem with that is living by these subjective standards.
How do you know that's good for you?
Okay, yeah, how do you know that's good for you? Right, but if you define what's good for you, then it may not be what's good for somebody else. Yeah, Kirby.
Our concept of fair from, because people use fair all the time, and he's like bonus points for, so there's some concept of fairness that's not discussed, so like where do they get their concept of fair?
Yeah.
If I could jump in on that, maybe
Yeah.
they would say like mutual self-interest, like we could live in a dog-eat-dog world, but it works better for you and it works better for me if we like try and cope and work together, so maybe they would argue something along that line.
Yeah, they're saying even though there's no standards given, there seems to be a standard implied of something that you enjoy or helps you, something that helps somebody else, and maybe something that helps everyone kind of on the planet, right? Well, what, Alex?
Oh, no, sorry, I had a question.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, so what's the problem? I mean, that all sounds great, right? And, you know, but what's the problem with that, Jack?
I mean, it's just like, why?
Okay, yeah, there's an ultimate, you know, why is that what's determined good, right? Why is that?
Like, even if it's good, then in the end, it doesn't matter anyway.
Right.
It doesn't
Makes you
matter.
feel
Like,
good.
even if you set a standard and you say, okay, well, this is the standard for humans, if you just die in the end and that's it, and the universe dies, and it's just like, who cares anyway?
Yeah, but wouldn't it be better for us to be like happy and not in pain and helping each other and things like that on our journey to the dirt?
I mean, I guess.
Right? Sam.
Well, I talked this through with my ethics professor last year, and I think that the problem with like this whole view of like happiness good, pain bad, utilitarianism, blah blah blah, is that like if ultimately none of it matters, then none of it actually does in fact matter. So the fact that something makes you happy doesn't make it good. It just means that it makes you happy, right? Cutting our hands off might as well make us happy, as though like eating ice cream makes us happy. At the end of the day, if nihilism is correct and naturalism is correct, then the logical conclusion is that happiness and pain and good and bad don't have any meaning independent from anything. They just kind of are.
Yeah, and we have to define what do you mean by happiness and what do you mean by good, because my definition of good and your definition of good and 10 other people in this room's definition of good can be different and will likely conflict, right? So what happens when there's a conflict? What if my definition of good is, you know, I like your stuff better, or I like your wife better, or I like this or that? That's good for me, right? Probably would contradict your definition of what's good for you. Chris?
Do they encourage suicide? Or assisted suicide?
Optimistic nihilism, I don't think they would. But
Euthanasia potentially, like if,
yeah,
wouldn't they say if that makes you happy, then that's what you should do those?
yeah. I mean, I was thinking, I wasn't thinking euthanasia. I was thinking more self-suicide. But yeah. I mean, again, there's no. I mean, your definition of, I'm sure if we took a vote here tonight on if we believed in euthanasia, if somebody that's suffering from a disease and they're in pain and they want to die, you know, would we be the one to help them do that? I'm sure if we took a vote here in this room that we would have some differences, right? So again, we're talking about is there something that can guide our decisions, some sort of a standard? Alex?
What's the difference between this and existentialism?
I'm glad you brought that up, because next week Grant is going to be talking on existentialism. And so he made a very good analogy when we were talking before this. He said it's kind of like standing on a wall and having a red rubber ball. He's like, as you throw it, you go from theism to deism to naturalism to nihilism, and then you bounce a little bit and you're up to existentialism. So I think that's where we'll be next week, but Grant's going to be talking on that. So I won't steal his thunder, nor can I, because I didn't read the next chapter. So, Lexi.
Well, I think it was an interesting point that Sam makes about the mutual self-interest. I always wonder when we talk about like that being an answer of like, oh, well, we'll try and do good for mutual self-interest. Why is it that people get mad when things like a corrupt business owner makes a lot of money off of other people? Like we tend to be like, oh, that's so unfair, that's so unjust, and like we actually see that happen all the time in reality. Why does the person who, you know, doesn't think there is any sort of cosmic right or wrong, why do they care if that business person has profited in that way? Like, because they're doing well and they're happy. Like, why is there any kind of moral outcry for that at all? Who cares?
Yeah, which we would argue kind of points to the fact that there's probably some objective standard that we all recognize, even though we might not acknowledge it. Harrison.
I'll just go back to the beginning. They kind of do what C.S. Lewis calls chronological snobbery, saying that the early humans just had like primitive views, they just like had water, and suddenly humans got smarter, which I guess in their viewpoint with evolution and all of that, that would be true. But in my worldview is that humans have always been very intelligent, and that was just one thing I saw from the beginning of the video.
Right, and we're guilty of that sometimes, but definitely you can hear that in here, this idea of chronological snobbery, that years ago people weren't as smart and advanced as we are, but now we're a lot smarter, and so we realize that their belief in a God or something that was over them, that was supernatural, was foolish, but we've graduated and we've learned a whole lot. So, Bill.
It appears to me that optimistic nihilism is almost the opposite of nihilism. Nihilism says nothing has meaning. Optimistic nihilism says everything has meaning, but I get to make it up.
Well,
So
yeah,
it gets to make it
yeah. I'm not even sure it says everything has meaning. I think they're acknowledging nothing has meaning, but let's live as if it has meaning, right? Because that way, our however many weeks that we have, 5,000 some odd weeks that we have, we can live in a time when we have a smile on our face more often than we have a frown on our face. Chris.
I think when the optimistic nihilism article, but like when it was talking about like, oh, you should try to do something even though there's really nothing to it, I instantly thought, oh, wait a minute, Linkin Park. In the end, it doesn't even matter, you know.
Try so hard.
Yeah. So it's like a whole song. It's got rhythm, it's got beats, got a great. I thought it was a great song, but you know, it's a whole song about nothing. Like in the end. So.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, I know I kind of suggested this last week. So if you're interested, there, Google The Noble Lie by Plato. Right? He had the concept of the noble lie. We all recognize that life is meaningless, but we act as if it does have meaning. We just lie to ourselves. And there's he has a really good story about that in one of his writings. And it kind of, I mean, this has been around for centuries. It's this idea that we know that life has no meaning, but we're just going to pretend like it does.
Right.
And we're just going to deceive ourselves. And the noble lie is a great illustration of that.
Yeah. So optimistic nihilism basically says the world isn't ultimately about us, right? I think we could all agree on that. In the midst of a meaningless existence, we have ultimate freedom. You heard him mention freedom a few times, that because there is no meaning, it's kind of like the old write your own ending storybook type things. Yeah. You're reading this book, and then in the end, guess what? You get to write the end of it. We've got complete freedom in that, and we can create the meaning in a meaningless world. And his last two lines that he mentioned were, "Do the things that make you feel good. You get to decide whatever this means for you," which is a nice escape from the conclusion that nihilism brings, right? Okay, there is no meaning. So rather than there is no meaning, period, there is no meaning, comma, do the things that make you feel good. You get to decide whatever this means for you. So one version of nihilism that you might see. Again, the two take-homes: if you believe naturalism is true, you should be a nihilist. If you believe your life has purpose, you really can't be a nihilist unless you're an optimistic nihilist and you've kind of made up your own ending, made up your own rules to the game. And And we saw where theism, God determines purpose, and naturalism, man determines purpose. And I think nihilism is the realization that everything is preference anyway, so there's no true meaning. Everybody in this room, everybody has defined their own rules to their game, the way they're going to play the game. And so there's no true meaning. It's just it's just billions of different meanings on the planet. So Christian nihilism, is that a thing? I don't know if it is or not, but I'm positing it as just a way to discuss something else. Can we as Christians live nihilistically? Can we live as if there is no purpose or meaning? And I would submit that we can. I would submit that we can do it by replacing our capital P purpose with little p purposes, right? Or creating little m meaning instead of pursuing capital M meaning. And you probably are seeing where I'm going here. If we are living for our little purposes throughout the day, or even throughout our lives, from one stage of our life to the next, if that is kind of our ultimate, right? And we are disregarding the grander picture, realizing that it's not about us, realizing that it's about the one who created us and has infused us with purpose, infused our lives with meaning. And so I would argue, my challenge is, if you're here and you're a Christian, are you a Christian nihilist in that God's purpose for life is being subsumed under your purposes for life? Another way that we can be nihilistic, and I don't think this happens as much, this is the person that is so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good, right? That they're so focused on eternity that they're not doing anything here, kind of Nietzsche's concern. But this is another way that I think we can, as Christians, we can be nihilistically, as we're so focused on the hereafter that we're not as focused on the here and now. So, source of meaning. How do we know the meaning of life? There's a quote by Blaise Pascal in the Pensees where we get this idea of a God-shaped hole. Right? You've probably heard that phrase before. You might have even heard the song by Plum about there's a God-shaped hole inside everyone. And so, according to the Christian worldview, we believe that life has meaning, and that each one of us know that, right? That we know that intrinsically, that there is meaning. We might not know what that is, but we know it. We know that as we look around, all of this isn't purposeless. It's not meaningless. And so Pascal said, what else does this craving, this helplessness proclaim, but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace. This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are. Though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object, in other words, by God himself. And I think the Bible even hints to this in Michael's favorite book, Ecclesiastes, in 3:11, where it says, He's made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And so, it seems that those who espouse nihilism are, in a sense, denying something that they probably know, that they're trying to. It almost goes to C.S. Lewis's argument for desire, for the existence of God. That if when we are hungry, that desire means that there is something out there, food, that can satisfy that hunger. If we're thirsty, there's something out there, water or liquid, that can satisfy that desire. Then if we get all of these accolades in life and all of these successes, all of this stuff that we get, and we're still not satisfied, that there must be something out there that is designed to satisfy that hole, right? And that's where I think we come back around to this God-shaped hole, that God has created all of us, that we're not an accident, that we're all here intentionally, purposefully, in God's sovereignty and in God's providence, that we all have a purpose, which in the Christian theistic worldview is to glorify God, and that's just not sitting around on clouds singing songs and playing harps all day, but glorifying God in this life, right? In what we do and whatever you do, whether you're a student, glorifying God in your studies, if you're a professor, glorifying God in your teaching, if you're a doctor, glorifying God in helping people, if you're a sanitation worker, glorifying God in doing what you do for His glory and for His honor, as well as glorifying God by sharing the good news of how you came to become a Christian, about our problem with sin, and about how He sent Christ to die on the cross to pay for those sins, and then basically His death paid for all of our wrongdoing, and His perfect life, His righteousness, is imputed to us in order to satisfy the just requirements of God. And so we see a contrast here in purpose and meaning as we kind of this trajectory from Christian theism down to naturalism all the way to nihilism. So I hope this is helpful in understanding this. I'm not sure you're going to see a whole lot of this full-blown on campus or among the students. One of the reasons why we're going through all these worldviews is so that if you wind up speaking with somebody and they hold any aspect of these worldviews, that you can recognize that and that you can know how to address it, know how to respond it, and kind of categorize it as you're sharing the gospel with them. So we have 5 minutes for comments or questions. Then I will pray at 8:30, and then you can hang out for as long as you would like until the snacks and drinks are gone on the back table, or until they kick us out. So any comments or questions about nihilism, or, John's here, so if you have a question about naturalism from last week, if you have a question about deism from 2 weeks ago, Grant's here. If you have a question about Christian theism from however long ago, Kinza's here. So any of the worldviews we've covered, if you have any comments or any questions, Chris.
So in nihilism, do they believe that the universe had a beginning, or that it has always been?
They believe that it's always been, because...
How would they explain that?
Or I guess the fact of going back to what we talked about over at Cape Fear, from a nihilist point of view, with the whole idea of that, today is the end of history, and so, being able to explain how that the fact that we even have it today, and that you can't go infinitely all the way back. So I don't know, you're doing a better job of explaining.
Yeah, so that was talking about the cosmological arguments for God's existence, but I think and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong. The naturalistic worldview historically is that matter has always existed, and I don't know if it will always continue to exist, or if there'll be a point where everything just kind of through heat death or whatever winds up. It seems like the matter will always, in some form or another, exist. Christian.
I think I might be able to answer this.
All right.
At least from Nietzsche's point of view, he basically just thought that life and everything just always constantly repeats over and over again in an infinite number of ways, but eventually gets back to the way they did before. So that's what he spends days on doing everything. So maybe the universe had a beginning or not, but it's just going to be always repeating the exact same way.
Well, I was actually just going to bring up something like maybe the universe dies, and then the universe, maybe some kind of cyclicality like that would be the possible belief for us.
Yeah, and we'll see that in a couple of weeks when we'll talk about the Eastern religions that have this cycle of reincarnation where energy is just kind of transformed, and this idea of cycles. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I thought we can't know anything, so we can't know whether the universe had a beginning or not.
Yeah, we can't know, but we can have fun talking about it. Bradley.
Yes, sir. So to repeat anything you said thus far, but what are some questions that we should ask nihilists to get them thinking about inconsistencies in their worldview?
Well, we can ask them, but that's how you really pronounce it. Do you pronounce it nihilism or nihilism? But I think we just push back on things that they will inherently recognize as having purpose or meaning. I mean, they may say that, but I think if you can get into a discussion with them and you can push them, you'll eventually get to a point where they will reveal that that there is a purpose for why they're doing what they're doing, that they can discern reality, that they can know what's really real and what's not real, and that, I mean, who can go through life just thinking that everything may be an illusion? I don't think that's something that you can say. I don't think that's something that you can practically live out. So you just have to have that conversation and just kind of push them and get them to a point where they can either admit that, they can know reality in some sense. They do have a sense of meaning or purpose. I mean, if they're here at UNCW, they've got a purpose, right, in a particular program of study, in order to go and to do something. Again, they'd probably fall more in the optimistic nihilism, where they're creating their own purpose. So, I mean, it's a squishy topic. It's really hard to nail somebody down on it when they can, just deny everything. Yes, sir.
And when they say there's no purpose, how can they prove there is no purpose? Their opinion there is no purpose. Same as how can you prove there is no God?
Mm-hmm.
If God is supernatural. If there's a God that exists, then we can't scientifically, well, we could, but it's not like we can just do experiments to say, oh, this X, Y equals X, therefore God is real.
Right.
So, who are they to say there is no purpose?
Yeah. Or at least an overarching purpose. I guess everybody can define their own purpose. Grace?
If there is no purpose, then, from a nihilist perspective, why should we mourn when people die? Why would that be a bad thing? If, especially, someone young dies, why is that a problem from their perspective? Why should that upset us?
Well, I mean, I don't think that they deny emotions, and they wouldn't deny that it's bad when somebody dies. They would just say it's unfortunate, right?
Is it bad if there's no purpose?
Yeah, it's a valid question. Yes.
I would think that there's no big purpose, overall, but as a person to person, with a relationship with that person, you would probably have their existence would have value in your life, and how they made you happy, or what they did for you in your life. So it's they don't have a big general purpose, but a personal purpose, I guess.
Yeah, because if you see the devolution from theism to deism to naturalism, basically what you've lost is that overarching ultimate purpose in life, that overarching meaning of life that is defined by a God in theism and deism. You've lost that, so it's the big purpose, and then everybody kind of creates their own personal purposes for their own life. Sam?
I was going to say that these questions and answers from the past couple of minutes have all seemed to kind of rest on or rely upon the nihilist.
I like nihilist. I'm good with it.
Having essentially epistemic or intellectual discrepancies being inconsistent. In other words, they require that the nihilist say there's no meaning, but then not like that death happens. So what would you say, and what would you do with the intellectually consistent nihilist?
Yeah, I would argue that there again appears to be things that are objectively true. There's objective morality, that there's objective truth that everyone can agree upon. I mean, if you can agree that there is one thing that we all agree is wrong, then there's at least meaning there. I don't think you have to explain everything. You just have to explain that it exists, and if it exists, then that seems to knock nihilism down, that there is no truth, there is no meaning. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It sounds to me like you're turning into a universalist.
No. I'm Cameron.
I feel like this might be a silly question, but on one of the slides you talked briefly about Christian nihilism.
Mhm.
So if you believe in that or might side towards one or the other, whatever you
Mhm.
believe in, could you even be a Christian nihilist, or would you not even be a true Christian to begin with if you
No, and I use that terminology. I saw it used and I've heard it used, but I don't think, when I say that, I don't mean a true nihilist. I think that sometimes we can act sometimes as nihilists in that we're rejecting that there is an overarching purpose, that God has a purpose for our lives which is greater than the trajectory of our plans, our own plans. So I don't think Christians obviously are not truly nihilist, but I think sometimes the way that we live and we plan, we can act that way. So I just happen to use the term. Yes.
You mentioned how some Christians might have a problematical view, like believing in reincarnation or karma. What would you say to a born-again Christian who believes that every time you fall ill or bad things happen to you, that God is judging you for not being a perfect Christian?
Yeah. So that is. All right, Christian, you have a response to that? Christian said, read the book of Job. Okay, the story of a man that suffered, not because of his unrighteousness, although he was unrighteous, but God called him blameless, called him righteous. So.
Like 3 friends constantly telling him, "Oh, you did something you don't know about."
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just say quickly that that's not the picture of God that Scripture paints. A God that is always, when we make a misstep or we do something wrong, that He's always looking to trip us up or zap us with a lightning bolt. Because if we are a Christian, that means that we are in Christ. And so that means that as far as the bad that we've done has been forgiven on the cross, the good that we do can never earn our salvation, although God calls us to continually pursue holiness. So the righteous life that Christ lived also gets imputed to us, just as His death and paying for our sins gets imputed to us. So when God looks at us, He sees perfect righteousness. Someone who is perfect, without sin, can spend eternity with Him in heaven. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences to sin, but again, that doesn't mean that because we might trip up, every one of our mistakes is going to be met with some sort of a divine reaction to that, in the sense that we might think of karma or something like that. So I know it's a really quick answer. I'll be glad to flesh that out if we want to do that afterwards, because we're about almost 10 after. So let me pray for us. And then if you want to stick around and talk with me, with each other, with any of our student leaders. Again, thank you, Myrtle Grove, for the snacks. When we get done here, y'all go finish them off so they have less to carry back to the car. But let me pray for us. Father, thank you for this evening. We thank you for each person here. We know that no one is here by accident, that you have providentially brought each one here to hear this message, God. We thank you for the Christian worldview, God, that we submit gives us an accurate view of the world that exists. Father, we pray that if there are those who are here that are struggling with their worldview or a particular worldview, God, that you'll bring clarity to them, that you'll give them wisdom. We pray that all of us in this room can encourage one another towards the truth, that we won't belittle each other or their views, Father, but that we can, again, sharpen each other as we seek the truth. And we believe that you're the source of truth, and that your word is truth, and that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. And so I pray that you'll be with each of these students throughout this week, that you will bless them with with good conversations, that you will help them to reflect on this, God, and that we trust that you will point them to the truth. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.